Hello and welcome to Topic 4, Lecture 2. And in this, we're going to take an overview of the civil liberties, the specific civil liberties you're going to be learning about in this chapter. So there's a lot to learn about in the chapter on civil liberties. I mean, it's a lot of information. And so the goal of this lecture is to give you a guidepost for navigating the major themes in civil liberties, okay? So guideposts for how to think about religious liberties, speech liberties, the right to privacy, and then the rights of the criminally accused. There's more stuff you'll be reading about in the chapters beyond just those four subject areas. And so I really want to encourage you, not just encourage you, but you should be reading the textbook as well, because there's a lot more detailed information about the cases that the Supreme Court has looked at to figure out what our rights are, okay? But in general, this is what we're going to be taking a look at in this lecture. So sometimes people are under the mistaken impression that because we have these individual rights that are enumerated in the Bill of Rights, that there are no limitations on those rights. That if you have the freedom of speech, you can, have this maximum liberty to do and say whatever you want, right? If you have the freedom of religious practice, you can practice your religion in any way. And that's just not the case, okay? This isn't Hobbes's state of nature. We don't have the maximum liberty to do whatever we want. There are some constraints that are placed upon our liberties. And so I want you to think about and keep this in mind throughout the course of reading about civil liberties, okay? That civil liberties is about having these individual rights, an individual's right to live freely. That's one interest. But it's balanced off the state's interests and obligations, okay? The state has to be able to do its job, okay? And so that, the Supreme Court is the one who determines what this proper balance is between an individual's right to live freely and making sure that the state is able to achieve its goals and obligations. So let me give you a concrete example of this, okay? All right, so in the Bill of Rights, you have the right to freely exercise your religion, okay? And so that means that you can go to your house of worship that you choose, that you can, wear religious garb, a hijab, a cross, dress in a way that corresponds with your religious beliefs, and that you can engage in religious practices, right? And so maybe that might be fasting, or maybe that might be eating or not eating certain foods or consuming certain items, right? But those are, an exercise of your religious beliefs, okay? The state has an interest and obligation as well, right? And so that when it comes to, driver's license, that you have to make sure that when people have their driver's license that you can clearly see their face. And so because you need to know that the person who's driving the car is actually the one who has the license to drive the car. So if you're engaging in an expression of your religion, that you wear a religious garb that, it makes it difficult for you to see your face, then the state may have an obligation to have a person remove such garb. Thinking about religious exercise, some people engage in faith healing, right? That, Christian scientists, say they don't want to have medical science interfere if they have a disease, and they want to be able to, engage in, if God wants you to recover, you'll recover. If not, God's will be done. But the state has an interest and an obligation to protect people, particularly to protect people who are minors, children, okay? And so that while you, as an adult, you could deny medical treatment to yourself, right? Because you're an adult, you're incapable of making that decision. Parents, cannot deny medical treatment of their children as a religious exercise, right? And so the state has an interest and an obligation of protecting the minor. Now, those are just some examples of this balance between the obligations of the state and the individual's right to live freely. And it's the Supreme Court who determines that proper balance, and that proper balance has changed over time, okay? So I want you to keep that in mind. You have liberties, but there are constraints to those liberties, and it's the Supreme Court that determines what constraints are considered constitutional. So let's start with the First Amendment. As we know, there are many liberties within the First Amendment, and so we are going to focus on two. We're going to focus on religious liberties and speech liberties. let's just make sure that we read the First Amendment. It says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Okay, so make sure that you read in the textbook about freedom of press. We'll be talking about that later in the semester when we get to media and politics, and the other liberties that are listed in the First Amendment. But we're just going to focus on religion and speech. Regarding religious freedoms in the First Amendment, there are two clauses or two types of religious freedom that are listed in the First Amendment. And so let me put these both up here at the same time, okay? And so one of the clauses, so here is the language, okay? And one of the clauses is known as the Establishment Clause, and I have that in yellow here. And the other is known as the Free Exercise Clause, and I have it in orange here. And so it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, that's the Establishment Clause, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, okay? So let's take a look and dig in and talk about what these clauses mean. So you might have noticed that when we were reading the First Amendment, that the first liberty that's listed in the First Amendment isn't speech, it's not press, it's not the right to assemble, but it's religion, okay? And that shouldn't come as a surprise, that, you know, the colonies were in part formed due to people escaping religious persecution in England and other places. And so, you know, religious freedom was always is a large part of the history and the political culture of the United States. And so it should be no surprise that religious freedoms is the first liberty listed in the First Amendment. And that's, you know, our framers had very specific goals as to why to include these religious clauses. One is that they wanted to reduce conflict. That we like to think about religion in the colonies and the early states as sort of monolithic. And in one way, they were monolithic, right? The overwhelming majority of folks who were religious at that time period were Christians, okay? Not all, but the vast majority. However, within Christianity, there's lots of different kinds of Christianity, right? You know, you have Catholicism, but then within Protestantism, you know, you have lots of different branches: Methodist, Baptist, you know, Lutherans, Anglican, what we call today is the Episcopal Church, Congregationalists, etc. Okay, and so, you know, when you have a country that has so much religious diversity in it, you want to make sure that, I mean, religion, as we know, can be a source of conflict. People will kill each other over their religious beliefs. And so the idea of the Establishment Clause in particular was to reduce conflict, right? You don't want the government siding with one religion or the other, like declaring one religion the religion of the nation, and then the other religions like are seen as sort of outsiders. And so the Establishment Clause is meant to reduce that conflict. It's also because you have the right to exercise your religion that the Free Exercise Clause gives protection for outgroup religions, right? You have the freedom to worship as you see fit, right? And express your religion as you want, right? With limitations, obviously. And so that makes it so that it, you know, again, you know, that you've got this constitutional protection for the diversity of religious expression throughout the United States. Also, that the Establishment Clause is, you know, saying that you have the freedom to worship, right? Or the Free Exercise Clause, but you can't be forced to worship. The government can't tell you that you must, you know, attend church or a house of worship, or pay a tax to a church, or take an oath of office in order to serve in government, right? And so that, again, that there's a sense that your religious beliefs are really tightly wrapped up in what it means to be a human. And so our framers wanted the government to be hands off on them. In the United States, there's some real consequences of this religious clauses, and whether they're positive or negative, it is comes from your own viewpoint. But there are some realities. For one, the United States has a high level of religiosity, which means that we have strong religious feelings or beliefs. And we know this because we do polls, right? I mean, and the Pew Research Center, they did a poll looking at global religiosity and comparing countries. And it was they asked three simple questions. Do you pray daily? Is religion an important part of your life? And do you think that you need to believe in God in order to be a moral actor? If you answer yes to all three of those questions, you have a high level of religiosity. If you answer no to all three of those questions, you have a low level of religiosity. The United States, compared to other advanced industrial democracies, we have a really high level of religiosity compared to countries like us, okay? And I think that high level of religiosity has to do with freedom, right? That when you combine church and state, people get turned off from religion, right? And so since there's this separation out, and since you can freely worship, it allows you to explore. We also have that religious pluralism. There's lots of different kinds of religions in the United States. That's continued to this day. And that religious pluralism is supported by both the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. All right, so let's dig in and take a look at each of these clauses. So the Establishment Clause is becoming kind of evident is that it's about the separation of church and state, okay? So at the most basic level, the Establishment Clause is saying that government cannot establish a national religion. But, the courts have moved on and said that, the Establishment Clause is more than just that. That the Establishment Clause forbids the government aiding one religion over another. It also forbids advancing or inhibiting religion. So in other words, government needs to be sort of hands-off when it comes to religion, more sort of neutral. As it says there, that government needs to be neutral when it comes to religion. And laws, when you do have laws that deal with religious organizations, that they must have a secular purpose, okay? And so, you'll read more about that in the textbook. So the question is that, okay, there's this wall separating church and state, and that phrase is not in the First Amendment, obviously. That comes through the writings of Thomas Jefferson, as he writes a letter to the Danbury Baptists, right? And he uses that word, that there's a strong wall separating church from state. The question is how tall and strong is that wall? And it's the Supreme Court who determines how strong and tall that wall is. Is it like a really tall brick wall where church and state never intermingle? Or is it like a chain link fence where there's some intermingling that goes on? Or is it just, it's really not really a wall? Is it more just like a little set of hedges where kind of jump back and forth, okay? Well, as you're reading the cases, you'll see that the court has come up with some ways of handling that wall. Where we see the strongest wall separating church and state is it's in educational facilities, okay? K through 12. You'll read about in the textbook that school prayer, that is, when the state says that children must recite a state-sanctioned religious prayer at the beginning of the school day, that's verboten. That is not allowed, and that remains unconstitutional, at least to this point. And it's pretty broad. You can't have a religious leader say prayer at graduation. You can't have a moment of silence, because the court said that sort of stood in for prayer, okay? And you also can't teach religious curriculum, right? You can't say, hey, you can either choose to go to the library or go to Bible studies during sixth period. All of that is forbidden. And the thinking there is that school children are very impressionable, right? And so if your teacher's leading you in prayer, even if you say, but you can go stand out in the hallway, you're not likely to do that, right? You're like, the non-believer goes out into the hallway, right? And also it's the jurisdiction of the parents, not the school, to like promote religious perspectives. You'll read about the Lemon test, because that's the test that's still enforced by the Supreme Court. Maybe it'll change in the future, that basically establishes what is and is not allowable in terms of the intermingling of church and state. Now, you're going to see, though, in outside of educational facilities, that there's more of a lower and a porous wall, more intermingling between church and state that the Supreme Court has allowed. The Supreme Court allows religious displays in public squares, in God We Trust on our currency, prayers before sessions of Congress, and also tax support for religious schools. So you'll be reading about vouchers and how vouchers paid by taxpayer dollars are seen as not violating the Establishment Clause. You'll read more about that. And so, they've argued that, having God We Trust on the money is sort of a reflection of our national history, that the religious displays, as long as they include all different kinds of religions and non-religions. So like from Seinfeld, whatever that was called, like the Festivus poll, right? Like as long as it's inclusive, it is allowed. So that kind of gives you an overview of the wall and how to think about it. Okay, so let's look at the Free Exercise Clause. The Free Exercise Clause is basically saying that you can believe and practice any religion. And so it's your choice. It's also your choice that you can hold no religious beliefs without any consequence, right? And so you have the choice to believe or to not believe. Now, keep in mind that the Supreme Court says that when it comes to the Free Exercise Clause, there's this thing called the belief-action distinction. In other words, it says there your religious belief is absolutely protected. You can believe whatever you want to believe as it relates to religion. You can believe that in order to go to heaven, you need to drink the blood of 3 virgins on the top of a hill during a full moon. You can believe that, but you can't practice it, okay? So religious belief is absolutely protected, but religious practice can be restricted if the government shows that there's a compelling reason for that restriction that uses strict scrutiny, which you'll learn about in the textbook in both the Civil Liberties and the Civil Rights chapter. And so going back to that example about providing medical treatment for children, an adult can believe in faith healing and they can apply that to themselves. However, they cannot practice that belief on their kids, okay? That the state has a compelling interest to make sure that children get the treatment that they need to thrive. And if a parent is standing in the way of that, they can't claim religious practice as a protection from that. There was a case several years back up in Wausau where there was a family who believed in praying over people when they were sick, and they prayed over their daughter who had a severe epileptic attack and died. And they used the Free Exercise Clause as their defense, but they failed in that defense, and they were found guilty of lower level manslaughter. So that's a good example of that. You can believe what you want to believe, but you can't always put it into practice. So let's move on to freedom of speech. So the First Amendment reads that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Okay? When you hear that word speech, just keep in mind the word speech has never been interpreted literally by the Supreme Court. They aren't saying that only verbal utterances are protected, but like books and pamphlets, movies, not protected. No, the Supreme Court has a robust definition of speech. And so as it says there, that speech, according to the Supreme Court, includes all forms of communication, okay? So written speech, oral speech, representative speech, paintings, etc., that all receives First Amendment protections. And that your textbook will talk about the concept of symbolic speech. And that is that when an individual takes an action that communicates an idea. So, for example, you'll be reading about the case Tinker versus Des Moines. That is a case about school children wearing armbands in action to protest the Vietnam War. And that kind of symbolic speech is protected by the First Amendment, as is burning flags. You'll read the burning the flags case as well. And so another thing to keep in mind about the freedom of speech is that the First Amendment applies to the actions of the government, okay? So freedom of speech concerns the government's effort to censor speech. Basically, the government passing a law saying you can't say that, right? You can't express that idea, okay? So that is, what the First Amendment is about. Why am I bringing this up? the First Amendment doesn't apply to non-governmental actors. Okay, so for example, you take a private actor like Twitter or Facebook, right? The First Amendment doesn't apply to Twitter or Facebook, at least not in terms of the way the First Amendment has defined the First Amendment. That may change in the future. And so, if Mark Zuckerberg wants to prohibit the communications on Facebook about poodles, right? My favorite dog, no poodle talk, no pictures of poodles, right? He can do that, right? He can apply that. It's a private group. I abide by their membership rules, right? And when I join, it say no poodles, and then if I post poodles, I'm going to be, my First Amendment rights are violated. No. So just keep that in mind. Freedom of speech in the First Amendment is something that we're telling government to do. We're telling government it can't censor our speech. Now, when you're reading these cases, keep in mind that not all kind of speech gets the same level of protection. Okay. So for example, commercial speech, like speech and ads, it doesn't get no First Amendment protection, but it doesn't get the highest level of protection. Pornography, right? The speech that's dedicated to titillating others, right? That actually falls outside of First Amendment protections. Okay. It doesn't receive First Amendment protections. The kind of speech that gets the greatest level, the highest level of protections from the Supreme Court is what's known as political speech. And here it's a broad definition of what political means. Political means speech that is designed to communicate ideas, communicate beliefs, communicate values, right? So when you're engaging in that kind of speech gets very high protections from the courts. And keep in mind that even hateful and offensive political speech is protected, okay? So the burning of the flag, a lot of people found that communication as highly offensive, but the Supreme Court said no. It's trying to communicate an idea about attitudes about the United States. It's protected speech. And you're going to be reading the Westboro Baptist case, the Snyder v. Phelps case from 2011. That's about this church that, condemns homosexuality, and they fly these really horrible posters, outside of soldiers' funerals and et cetera. And as you're going to see in Snyder v. Phelps, even though that a lot of people find that kind of speech offensive, that it's trying to communicate an idea about homosexuality, and that is protected speech. Not everybody agrees that it should be protected speech, but where we are with the Supreme Court today, that's where we stand. So why does political speech, the speech that is communicating ideas, why does that receive such high protection from the court? The idea is that you cannot have a democracy without the free exchange of ideas, and you really don't want the courts involved in determining what kind of speech is allowed and what kind of speech is not allowed. The thinking is that the marketplace of ideas will basically temper speech, right? That, when somebody comes out and says something hateful, right, people will push back. They will reject that kind of speech, right? With Westboro Baptist Church, the protesters who are against the Westboro Baptist Church, they meet speech with speech, right? The protesters are in, a designated protest area, right, holding their hateful signs. And then, during the Matthew Shepard trial, he was a gay man who was killed in Laramie, Wyoming, over a decade ago. The people who were there, they dressed as angels, and they put their wings up, and they, made it so that they surrounded the hate speech, right? So it's this idea that, in a democracy, meet speech with speech, right? The government shouldn't be involved in deciding what speech should be allowed and what speech can't be allowed. And also sometimes provocative, offensive ideas, right? Like, women are smart and they could vote, they should be able to hold political office, whatever, right? That might seem really like offensive back in the day, right? But, we let those ideas come out, people think about them, the truth rises to the top, right? And then non-truth will be, countered with truth, and it will fall to the wayside, at least in theory. So that's why it gets such high level of protection. Now, as I mentioned in the last slide, some speech is considered outside of First Amendment protections. Not, that again, it's that delicate balancing act, right, with our civil liberties. And so, yes, you have the right to freedom of speech, but it's not unilateral. It's that there are limitations that are placed on it. If your speech presents a clear and present danger, you'll read about that in the textbook from Brandenburg v. Ohio. The court defines what is a clear and present danger, and if your speech is deemed clear and present danger, that speech can be curtailed by the government. Also, fighting words. So, if you just are calling like a cop, whatever, like you effing blah blah blah, you can get in trouble for that. It's language that's just designed to bring about a fight. That's not protected speech. So if you do that, when you're arrested by the cop and you're like, oh, freedom of speech, no, it doesn't work that way. A criminal speech, right? A conspiracy to kill somebody, right? That's not protected speech. Harassment's not protected speech. Pornography is not protected speech either. Okay. So again, coming back to this idea of the delicate balance. Yes, you have the right to freely speak, but there are some kinds of utterances, some kinds of expressions that can be censored and curtailed by the government. This brings us to the right to privacy. So what is the right to privacy? Well, the right to privacy is more than just the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment says that that government cannot engage in an unreasonable search and seizure. So when you think about the Fourth Amendment, we're usually thinking about police searches, right? When police, think you have probable cause to believe that you're, involved in a crime, and then they can get a search warrant and search you. Okay. It's a part of, the foundations for the right to privacy, but the right to privacy is more than that. Okay. The right to privacy is this fundamental right that individuals should be left alone, that there is this private space, whether it's in their home or their body, how they want to raise their kids, that there's this, their family choices, that there's this fundamental right that we have just to be left alone from government intrusion above and beyond like a criminal search. Okay. And so the right to privacy covers the issue of private matters. Private matters such as birth control, whether or not a person can use birth control, or whether a government can prohibit and say, nope, you can't use birth control. Abortion, whether or not you have a right to an abortion. Sexual autonomy, right? This idea that you can, as an adult, you can choose to decide who you want to have sex with. Obviously adults can't have sex with children, right? There's a compelling interest to protect children from sex predators. But to adults that they have, that it's their right to privacy to decide they want to have sex with somebody of their same sex, same gender identity, same, sexual orientation, or opposite, whatever. Decisions about marriage, decisions about the right to die. Okay. All of these are under this notion of the right to privacy. Now, what's interesting about the right to privacy, and we see this from over the summer, is that the right to privacy is not specifically stated in the Constitution, right? In the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law abridging your freedom of speech, right? It's right there in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights. The right to privacy is it's not enumerated. It's seen as an implied right. And that implied right comes through the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. I don't want to go into too much details. I teach a civil liberties class. Feel free to take that where you'll learn more. But in the Due Process Clause says that states and the federal government, that's in the fifth, cannot take away your life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. The word liberty is in there, okay? And so what the courts have done over time is that they have said that word liberty is expansive. Just because it's not written in the Constitution, right, in the Bill of Rights, I have that in the Ninth Amendment as well, it doesn't mean that liberty is not afforded to you, okay? And so it's seen as a liberty, a right that it comes out of the Bill of Rights, even though it's not specifically stated. It is no doubt a source of controversy, okay? And the controversy is whether or not the Constitution provides protection for these matters. Birth control, the right to marry who you want to marry, the right to have sex with who you want to have sex with, the right to an abortion, the right to die, okay? And there's disagreements, as we know, on the court regarding, is there even a right to privacy in the Constitution? And if there is, what does it extend to? And so in this section, you're going to be reading about key cases. Griswold, that's the case that establishes that there is a right to privacy and that it says that you have the right to privacy as it relates to contraceptives. Roe v. Wade, that was the landmark case that said that the right to privacy extends to the right to an abortion before viability of the fetus. Roe was overturned, as we know, this summer by the case Dobbs. That is not going to be included in your textbook, okay? Feel free to come to office hours if you want to talk about the Dobbs decision. I'd be more than happy to talk about it. But basically, Dobbs said that Roe was wrongly decided. That they basically said that there is no constitutional right to an abortion in the Constitution. It's unclear if that's going to apply to contraceptives, if it's going to apply to the sex. Lawrence is a case saying that state laws that criminalize same-sex endeavors, oral sex and anal sex, same-sex endeavors, there used to be laws in the books. Lawrence says no, that adults, that you have a right to privacy when it comes to how you have sex and who you have it with. And Obergefell is the landmark case that establishes a constitutional right to marriage and that same-sex couples can get married just like straight couples. All of this kind of hangs in the balance. We're not sure. In Dobbs, they opened the door saying that that right to privacy is not in the Constitution, at least not as it applies to abortion. It remains to be seen whether or not it will be expanded to say, nope, you don't have a right to privacy for contraceptives or for marriage or for sexual autonomy. We'll see what happens. And finally, we're going to talk about the rights of the criminally accused. Although, as I said, there are a lot more liberties in the Bill of Rights that you're going to be reading about in the textbook, so make sure you read that. A big portion of the Bill of Rights is dedicated to the rights of the criminally accused. 40% of the 10 amendments are dedicated to rights for the criminally accused. And so the rights of the criminally accused can be found in the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, and the Eighth Amendment, okay? That these amendments outline the rights that are granted to those accused of committing a crime, okay? So, it applies to the purview and the extent of searches. It applies to trial rights, whether you have a right to counsel, whether you have a right to speedy trial. And the eighth applies to punishment, okay? That it prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. I'll let you read the details about them in the case, in the textbook, and feel free to come to office hours to go into more detail, okay? However, what I want you to think about is why 40% of the Bill of Rights is dedicated to the rights of the criminally accused, right? It seems like, hey, why do we care so much about those who are accused of crimes? Well, the reason is what our framers had in mind is that the state is mighty and the individual is weak. And an individual who is accused of the crime is one of the weakest, right? Because if you're accused of a crime, it's like, you probably did it. Send them off to jail, right? And so the framers really thought that, the first step towards an autocracy is just allowing the state to charge people and try people and punish people with no restraints placed on that power. And so there's vibrant restraints that are put on the government in terms of their prosecution of those accused of crime. All right, thanks a lot for listening. There's a lot to cover in this chapter. And again, like I said, feel free to email me questions, come to office hours, set up an office hour that works for you if you want to talk more about civil liberties. Thanks a lot for paying attention. I'll talk to you again soon.